Previously on
StillWorks.
Okay, so you've seen chaotic in-grain cutting boards. Sure. You've also seen patterned plywood. Well then, how's about chaotic patterned plywood? Once finished, I asked for suggestions on next steps. Now I need your help in figuring out what to do with this thing. And I got this comment from MJL Woodworks, so let's go. Clocks are round, right? So I'll follow the procedure in the StillWorks Circle Cutting 14 volume guidebook. Order yours today. Number 1, take off the base plate and mark the location of the mounting holes. Then countersink and drill out those locations and put it back on. Plunge the router to get the bit location. Then measure to the pivot hole and drill a hole that matches the shank of a nail. Stick the workpiece down, tap in the nail, and loop the router around. Once I've got the piece free and clear out the channel, I'll very carefully cut the rest of the way through with the bandsaw. To get the last bit of the waste, I used a flush trim bit on the router table, running the bearing against the clean cut section. And while I'm here, I'll round over both the front and back of my new disc. At the bench, I'll drill a tiny hole through the same nail hole from the back to the front, which will give me the center point. This is critical in finding the spots for 1 through 12 on the clock face. Any straight line that passes through that center point can be my noon and 6 line. Then a perpendicular line that passes through that center point gives me 3 and 9 o'clock. Lastly, 30 degrees off of those lines finds the remaining numbers. Now I'll measure in about 1 1/8 inches and line up the edge of a Forstner bit with that dot and knock it to get a point. At the drill press, I'll bore down some distance, doesn't really matter how deep. I used a 3/4 inch bit for 12, 3, 6, and 9, and a 3/8 for the other positions. Now for some black epoxy in those holes and let this thing rest till the morning. Now if this thumbnail looks familiar, you know that a real woodworker knows just how long they can dig in with the random orbital sander. Per the instructions, I'll drill a hole through the center of my clock, put on a rubber washer, and stick the shaft through. 5/16 my ass. I always had drill press at the bottom of my wish list, as I figured I could do everything it could by hand well enough. But then you get situations like this where you need to widen a hole and there's nothing for a brad point bit or the spur of a Forstner bit to bite into, and then the drill press really shines. With that sorted, the next thing is to see how much I'm going to have to inset the mechanism to get this brass washer and nut to thread onto the shaft. I'll get a visual of that depth using a nail. Then trace out the shape of the mechanism and route some clearance. This doesn't have to be pretty, just as long as the mechanism can sit all the way in the depression. Once I put it all together and make sure everything clears, I'll take it back apart and do some final sanding and cut down some off-cut blocks from the bandsaw operation. I'll glue these on the back to create a little standoff and give the clock that 3D effect. Some water-based poly goes on the show side and I can hang it up. Thanks for watching.